Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. This week, we are talking about Marvel's King in Black event miniseries. So, yeah, we're talking King in Black, we're talking Knull, we're talking Venom. Enough said, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cultured Pull List, part of the Cultured Universe podcast network. In fact, this is the first episode of the Cultured Pull List that has been uploaded onto the Cultured Universe channel. So, yeah, if you're watching, I mean, obviously, if you're watching this. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're new, welcome. If you've been watching the Cultured Pull List for a while, thank you so much. Really appreciate your support. But let's get into the King in Black. So before we get into the actual King in Black storyline, I do just kind of want to delve into like who Null is, as well as some stuff from Absolute Carnage, which was the mini series event that took place kind of directly before this. It was kind of a in a lot of ways it is kind of a prelude or like a chapter 1 to this whole story. So, first of all, big spoilers for this for Absolute Carnage, for King in Black, just for all this stuff in general, so be forewarned. And yeah, so let's get into Null himself. So if you're not familiar with Null, Null is basically this god that's been around since like the dawn of time, and he's ruled over the endless nothing of pre-creation called the Abyss. Basically just the darkness that was around before, everything came into existence, and he created symbiotes to be like, his little armies, little lackeys, and he's had many different iterations of the symbiotes, including like these dragon symbiotes that were actually sent to Earth during like the time of the Vikings. And one of these dragon symbiotes fought Thor, and the symbiote was called Grendel, and he was defeated by Thor. So fast forward, we have the Venom symbiote, who's bonded with a ton of different hosts, but most notably Spider-Man and Eddie Brock, of course. And Venom and all of his offspring have been cut off from this hive mind that almost all of Null's symbiotes have. Null himself was eventually defeated by his own creations, the symbiotes, because he's kind of an asshole. And the symbiotes captured him and basically formed a planet around him called Clintar. And so he's been taking a long nap for a long time, kind of a forced sleep. And Carnage, being the psycho that he is resurrected, and then he wants to release Null. To do that, he wants to reestablish himself in the hive mind of the symbiotes, and he needs to collect these things called codexes or codices. The more codices he collects, the eventually he's going to like tap back into the hive mind with Null. A codex is something that a symbiote leaves in its host, whether it leaves or not. Like if it binds with a host fully, then it's going to leave a codex. And enough of these codexes, and Carnage is going to be able to get in contact with Null and wake him up. So a resurrected Cletus Cassidy binds with the dragon symbiote, so now he's like Mega Carnage. He's going around collecting all the codices from current or previous hosts of symbiotes, and it's this big thing where he almost takes over New York, and eventually Eddie defeats him by combining with a bunch of other codices himself, and he kills Carnage to save his son Dylan. But in so doing, he absorbs all of Carnage's codices and accidentally wakes up Null, who escapes from Clintar and is now on his way to Earth. And that's pretty much where we're at before the King in Black storyline. So let's hop into that. King in Black was written by Donny Cates with art by Ryan Stegman. Now, they're the writer artist team that did the Venom run that led up to this, as well as Absolute Carnage. Now, the inkers were J.P. Mayer with Ryan Stegman, colors by Frank Martin with Jason Keith, and letter was VC's Clayton Cowles. And this is a 5-issue miniseries that was released between December 2020 and April of 2021. So really just a few years ago. Relatively new as far as comics go. Something I did forget to bring up about the Absolute Carnage storyline is it was revealed that Dylan Brock is actually like the physical manifestation of the codex that was in Anne Weying, Eddie Brock's old girlfriend. Think I don't remember. I think fiance. I don't think they were married, but she used to be the host of Venom and I think another symbiote, and a codex was left in her by Venom, and the codex, like when she gave birth to Dylan, the codex kind of morphed into Dylan, I guess. So now Dylan's like part human, part symbiote, I guess. So he has a strong connection to symbiotes and Knull, and he has like crazy power over symbiotes. He's kind of like, in a way, mini Knull, in all intents and purposes. So yeah, that was kind of important to the story here. So anyway, these big dragon symbiotes show up, start attacking Earth. Tony Stark releases a bunch of these Kree and Skrull ships that he has rigged for this occasion because Eddie had warned the heroes of Earth that Knull was coming. And this explosion only takes it about like half of this huge army of dragon symbiotes. So the rest come to Earth, and the heroes of Earth prepare themselves to defend Earth from Knull's onslaught. Meanwhile, Eddie locks his son Dylan in this vault that Spider-Man loaned him, as the same vault that Ezekiel, what's his face? Ezekiel Sims was locked in, and he locks Dylan in here to keep him safe, and then goes off to fight Knull. And all, as you can see here, if you're watching the YouTube version, all the heroes of Earth are fighting these dragon symbiotes, but there's just so many of them. Venom goes down into the sewers, and he finds this like symbiote spire that Carnage had left to communicate with his symbiote. So Venom thinks he can like connect to this spire and try and connect to Knull and see what like his plan is. But while he does this, Knull shows up with a bunch of Celestials that he has that have become the hosts of symbiotes, have been possessed by these symbiotes. So now he's in charge of Celestials, which is not a great thing. If you know anything about the power levels of Celestials, that's yeah, no bueno. So Knull himself shows up, says he's going to kill your world, our world, which real nice, real nice introduction. Seems like a sweet guy. But he also says that he wants Brock. He doesn't say, who, but everyone assumes it's Eddie. But just then, Sentry shows up. He's the ace in the hole of Earth's heroes. And he grabs Knull, takes him out to space, and attempts to like rip him in half like he did with Carnage years ago. But instead, Knull kind of turns the tables on him and instead rips Sentry in half and absorbs the void um, force that was inside him. So that's not great. And Knull uses all his powers to overwhelm the heroes and cover the entire Earth in symbiotes, basically, which is crazy. And he also finds Eddie and grabs him and separates Venom from Eddie, and then sends Eddie falling to his death. Oh, and he also tells Eddie that he's actually looking for Dylan, not him. He needs his son Dylan. So Eddie falls, and he lands on a car and is horribly injured. Spider-Man shows up and is going to take him to a hospital, but then he gets overwhelmed by a bunch of heroes that have been possessed by Knull and are now under his control. But then Johnny Storm shows up, and he uses his supernova blast that he does to hold the symbiotes off while Spider-Man can escape with Eddie. But then he's possessed himself, unfortunately. So back at the home base of the Fantastic Four, Eddie is being cared for, but things don't look good for him. And all of the heroes, all of like the leaders of the heroes, like Blade and Black Panther, Reed Richards, Magneto, Professor X, they're all kind of arguing over what they're going to do next. But Tony Stark kind of takes charge, and he says he has a plan to inject Extremis into one of these dragon symbiotes and basically take it away from the hive mind and control it himself. And then he sends Namor to go get these like deep trench Atlantean warriors to help them, and he sends Blade to get help from Dracula and his vampires. So that is what they do. Everyone hops on that plan, and Tony successfully injects Extremis into one of these dragons, and it also seems to kind of give him like a new like symbiote Iron Man suit, which is kind of cool. Another one of another part of his plan was he was going to take a symbiote, another symbiote injected with Extremis, and separate it from the hive and connect, bond it with Eddie to save his life. But when he comes back to bond, it seems like the bond between the symbiote and Knull isn't quite broken, and it starts to kill Eddie. So then Dylan instinctually uses his powers to destroy the symbiote, and now like everyone knows how powerful Dylan is, and Dylan wants to go out and fight Knull for killing his father because unfortunately he was not able to save Eddie. Eddie flatlines. So he goes out, starts fighting with the heroes along with Spider-Man. He starts freeing Earth's heroes from Knull's control. And then Thor shows up and helps him, and he fights Knull hand to hand himself. Oh, another big thing is apparently Knull and his symbiotes are allergic to lightning. No, they're immune to lightning. Not immune. Their weakness is lightning instead of like fire and sonic sound waves. Interestingly, so this whole time everyone was waiting for Thor to show up, and he finally does, and he goes hand to hand with Knull for a while, even like knocking Knull's jaw off, which is crazy. But Knull is able to heal, and Thor is distracted when Knull starts having the Eternals he controls attack Earth, and when Thor is distracted, Knull stabs him in the black with his in the back with his sword, all black. There we go. So then Tony shows up though, riding his new symbiote dragon pet, and he actually latches on and bonds with one of the Celestials. So now he's controlling one of the Celestials, and starts fighting the other Celestials controlled by Knull. Unfortunately, though, with Thor stabbed, Knull is able to capture Dylan and try to turn him to this side. Meanwhile, Silver Surfer is on his way, and he is trailed by this power, this essence that we aren't sure what it is yet. So yeah, so Dylan's trying to be controlled by Knull. Knull like explains that like he basically considers Dylan a son, and he wants to kind of absorb Dylan's power, I guess, and just kind of become even more powerful, I guess is the idea. But Dylan's able to fight back and hold Knull off. And meanwhile, we just kind of cut to all the heroes fighting, and Doctor Strange becomes like, I don't know, he has his other wizard form that he um, turns into that I guess is a lot more powerful. That they don't really explain this, and I'm not really familiar enough with Doctor Strange comics to know if this is like a big thing in other Doctor Strange comics. But so there's that, and then Thor and Storm use their electricity powers combined to take out a lot of symbiotes. It's all pretty badass. If you're only listening to the audio, you're missing some of this, which is kind of a shame because I gotta say Ryan Stegman's art is really cool. I'll talk a little more about that later, but yeah. So there's that, and then Jean Grey enters the fray, and she's able to get into Knull's mind and kind of shut him down a bit. But she's also able to look at his history and see how he formed, like his sword and his armor, and how he's just been like taking on these incredibly powerful beings since like the dawn of forever. But also she learns that there is this force of light that came into being to kind of combat Knull and the Abyss, and Knull has been fighting this power which chooses like hosts kind of like his symbiotes do. And he's been fighting this force for a long time. For a while, the force like was bonding with a lot of people and making kind of a mini army, but it realized its power was being diluted by that. So since then, it's only been choosing one person at a time to carry its power. And we also learned that this power is the Enigma Force, which has been popping up in Marvel Comics for a while. And yeah, since 1979, and is also the power behind Captain Universe. And this is the force that has been following the Silver Surfer, and it's trying to get in to Earth to fight Knull, but it can't because of the big symbiote wall that Knull made. So Silver Surfer is able to break through the symbiote wall and let the light in, and which then goes and chooses Eddie Brock as its champion and like resurrects him. So then we see the Silver Surfer take on Knull himself, which he turns his surfboard into a sword. It seems like the Silver Surfer is given a little bit of power from the Light Force as well, but just him turning his surfboard into a sword is just kind of badass. So that they fight, and then Silver Surfer is joined by all the heroes freed by Dylan and Thor, and they all start fighting Knull. But then Eddie shows up, and he's basically like Goku plus Venom here. It's pretty cool. And he actually takes Thor's hammer, which he's able to yield, and he takes Silver Surfer's surfboard sword, and he combines them into this like super powered battle axe, and he starts chasing down Knull, who runs away like a little bitch and hides behind his other symbiotes, his dragon symbiotes and the Celestials. But Eddie just keeps pursuing him. He chases him down. He cuts his way through all the dragons and the Celestials, and then he finally makes his way to Knull, and he uses his axe to cut off and remove Knull from his symbiote armor. And then he takes Knull, he flies through the symbiote blockade around the Earth. He flies Knull to the sun and just completely evaporates him, which is really freaking cool. So Knull is gone, Knull is dead. Eddie returns to Earth. The axe that he had goes back to Thor and Silver Surfer as Mjolnir and his surfboard. But Eddie realizes that Dylan still has a piece of Knull in him, so he uses the power of the Enigma Force to rip that out of Dylan and free him from Knull's influence. And he destroys it. And after that, the Enigma Force feels like Eddie has completed his task and it leaves him. But Venom finds Eddie again, and they combine again. But now, since Eddie defeated Knull, and now he's back with Venom, he is now I guess the nexus point of the symbiotes, and he is now their new king in black. And that is how the story goes. So that is King in Black. I have a lot of thoughts on this. First of all, really, it's just pretty freaking badass. I really like Knull as a villain. He's really cool. He's kind of like one of those villains that's like Thanos level, Dark Side level, just like a really big bad who just takes on the whole Marvel universe. Is I thought it was cool that they had a bunch of other Marvel characters in it. I kind of expected it to just be like Venom and Spider-Man, but reading this, obviously it includes the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, everybody. So I thought that was cool. I think Donny Cates did a really good job juggling all those characters. I think I do feel like the story was a bit like short. I felt like it could have been another couple of issues to kind of flesh some things out, and it kind of just felt like constant like jumping from action to action, which is cool, and that can be exciting pacing, but it does feel a bit, at least to me, feels a little bit underdeveloped in some respects, and I guess I feel that way about Knull a bit. He showed up several times, but this is really the first time that we see him like actually do stuff, and I feel maybe like he felt a little bit underdeveloped. I feel like maybe we could have done more. Now I totally could be wrong here. They might have done like a bunch of tie-in lead up stuff that shows a lot more of Knull, but I feel like in the main storyline they could have done a little bit more to develop him, but he is just insanely like badass and powerful. So that's really cool. I really like the whole idea of there being like a king of the symbiotes. I honestly just really like all the symbiote lore, where the symbiotes were created by Knull and then they turned against him and imprisoned him. I think all that's really cool. And yeah, just like the way, he's able to take over the entire Earth, just engulfing it in symbiotes is insane. I love that. I think it's really cool. I think Eddie honestly could have been given a little more to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's a huge part of the story, but for most of this story, he's like dead or dying. I mean, he does get his time to shine at the end, obviously, but I don't know, it felt as this was kind of the culmination of Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman's run on Venom. It feels like he wasn't in the story that much. But yeah, all that to say, like the art was freaking great. I really love Ryan Stegman. So I was actually able to meet Ryan Stegman once in person, or once kind of by I sort of met him by proxy. Not you'll see. So back when Superior Spider-Man was first coming out 11 years ago in 2013, my dad actually went and picked me up the first few issues, but Ryan Stegman happened to be signing books at the comic store that day, and so my dad got the first like three issues of Superior Spider-Man signed by Ryan Stegman. I thought that was awesome. And then like several years later, so just a couple years ago, I was at a Comic Con and Ryan Stegman was there, and I met him and was able to get some of my books signed by him. It was unfortunately, it was one of those like mildly disappointing meetups, like, and I don't like begrudge him or anything at all. It's just kind of one of those things. Like sometimes you meet somebody at a con and they're like super friendly and they'll talk to you. And sometimes you can tell they're just tired. It's been a long day and they're not super talkative. That's kind of how it was with Ryan. Like he was nice, but he obviously wasn't like, very talkative. It always obviously been a long day. So that's always kind of a thing, when it comes to meeting people at cons or, having books signed or something. Like sometimes it's just a bad day. Like they're people. Like, come on, you can't, like I don't expect them to be like all like happy and bubbly like all the time, but it is nice to have a nice conversation sometimes with people. So yeah, so I met him. I wasn't really able to talk with him much, but I got some books signed again, which was awesome. So yeah, but Ryan Stegman just overall is awesome. I really like all his art. He has a very particular style. Like I really like the way he draws Venom and Carnage. That's really fun, and I've been really enjoying his work on the new X-Men run. I really like his Cyclops design, and really just his design on all the characters. He has kind of a way of blending like realistic designs with almost kind of cartoon-ishness, I guess, but it doesn't look too like cartoony. Yeah, I think it's really cool. Now, for Donny Cates, I'm not super familiar with a lot of his other work. I think I've read a little bit here and there, but I've read this. I read Absolute Carnage. I do really like his work on Venom because I know he introduced like a lot of new lore, specifically Knull and the whole like King of the Symbiotes thing. I thought that was really cool. I really like the way they keep expanding Venom and the symbiotes whole lore and story and everything. So yeah, I thought that was cool. Overall, it was a really fun story, but like I said, it felt a little bit cut short. I would have liked a little more, maybe. But yeah, so overall, I probably give this like a 7.5 because Knull is really cool. It was like the battle scenes were awesome. Like it was a very cool story. I just kind of would have liked a little more to like flesh things out a little bit. But anyway, before we stop talking about King in Black and get to my cultured picks, I do want to talk a little bit about Venom and Sony and what they're going to do with Knull. So, the reason I picked this story is number one, I really wanted to read it. And number two, a few weeks ago, Venom Let There Be Carnage. No, sorry, Venom The Last Dance came out. The end of the whole like Venom trilogy. And, love them or hate them, they were doing Knull. They were bringing Knull into the third movie. I'll be honest, I mostly enjoy them. They're obviously not like great movies, but I think as far as Sony Marvel like Spider-Man movies go, like outside of Spider-Man, I think they're relatively solid compared to others. Besides the second, I mean, I'll be honest, the second one's kind of a mess. But yeah, so I did enjoy The Last Dance for the most part, but like the coolest part for me was Null, just having him in it and introducing it, and they did a better job so far than I expected. All it is right now is just an introduction to Null, but they actually did a decent job with the lore in the movie. Like they actually went through and like talked about codices, the codex, and that Null like needs it to, you know, get out of Clintar away from his imprisonment. And they did do the whole backstory where Null, was betrayed by the symbiotes and imprisoned, like in the comics. They obviously changed some things, like it wasn't like he just needs the one codex, but they obviously, they weren't going to go the whole absolute carnage route. The biggest thing that they changed was they made a codex different. Like they made it so that if a symbiote revives their host, like if their host dies and they bring the host back to life, somehow that creates a codex, instead of just it being something that a symbiote leaves in its host. So I felt like that was kind of an unnecessary complication. Kind of weird that they changed that, but I was just kind of happy that they kept the whole codex storyline, and they were kind of surprisingly accurate to the Knull lore, at least so far. But obviously, Knull is just kind of in the background of this, and he's just sending creatures after Venom, which I think they also had like he had these creatures that were like symbiote hunters. I could be wrong, but I don't think those are in any other comics. So that was definitely something that they added. But in the end, it seems like Knull is released, and it seems like it's because the Codex was destroyed. Because spoilers, Venom, the symbiote, dies in the end. Um, but it's not really clear how he got revived. Like I'm sure they'll try to explain it later. But I will say, so far, I am cautiously enjoying what the Sony is doing with Knull so far. Like they showed some images, like these flashbacks of him being captured and betrayed by the symbiotes, and that was really cool. Like they got his armor down perfectly. He even had like the big like red spider thing. He's got his sword. He's got all black. I think so far, and I really like his design. It's obviously CGI, but you know, it still looks good. I am like nervous what they're gonna do with him because I've heard a lot of rumors that Sony's going to use Knull down the line. That this, like the director of this, even said that this was just the introduction of Knull, which I think kind of makes sense. Like if you're going to do Knull, you need to do like a big thing. That would just kind of be like Thanos being the villain in like Captain America 3 or Iron Man, probably more like Iron Man 3, instead of like an overarching big villain. But at the same time, it's like I just don't see Sony's universe is not interesting. Like you either hate all of them or like me, you kind of like the Venom movies and don't really like anything else because it's just a mess. Um, and there's been a lot of talk about Spider-Man 4 being a multiverse movie instead of like a more grounded street level movie like a lot of people, including myself, wanted. It seems like they're gonna bring back, Toby and Andrew for another multiverse movie. Now, for me, I kind of hope that they do more of a Spider Verse movie if they're going to go down that route. I hope it's not just kind of a rehash of No Way Home. I hope that they actually do like introduce some other Spider Verse characters in live action. It'd be really cool to see Ben Riley in live action and Kane, but it would also be cool to see like Spider Gwen. But there's been some rumor, like some speculation that maybe Null will be the bad guy in that. But from everything, I have a bad feeling that they're just going to keep Null in like the Sony Spider-Man movies and make him like they're gonna do a big team up movie with all their shitty characters and make Null the big bad guy of that. Like I even heard rumors that they're once again Sony is having plans for a Sinister Six movie, and it's going to be like all of their Sony characters, like Venom, and which I don't know how they're gonna do that, but there's Venom, there's Craven, Madam Web, Morbius, and then even I think Vulture, Michael Keaton's Vulture, and I guess they're gonna make a Sinister Six movie with them, which is like sounds even worse than what they were planning to do with the whole Amazing Spider-Man route. So it's like, what are you doing? Like that is such a way to waste Null. I mean, not even going to the story we just covered. Null was such a huge villain that it took like the entire Marvel universe. Like it would honestly be a waste of Null's character to not have him either be like in the MCU, which I don't see them doing. They're too stupid to do this, uh, or to bring him in as like a villain for a big Spider-Verse team up movie. I could see that working as well, but having him go against the characters in failed movies that nobody likes is such a dumb idea. I really hope that they don't go down that route. And it would really just show that Sony has learned nothing from their failures of Morbius or Madam Web or even this movie underperformed, even The Last Dance underperformed. I think if Craven doesn't do well, maybe that will change their minds, but I don't know, we'll see. But I really like what I've seen so far from Knull. I am just very worried about what they're going to do with him going forward. He really needs to have cool characters to go up against him, and he needs a good story. And I don't see Sony doing that by themselves. I can see them doing that in conjunction with like Marvel Studios, like they did with the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. But yeah, I guess we'll see going forward. But Null is super cool. Having him be in a movie after being only introduced like 4 years prior is kind of crazy and kind of awesome. So big props to Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman. That's freaking great. I just really hope Sony doesn't ruin it like they have with almost all their other characters that they've used from Spider-Man's world. But yeah, that's all I have to say about this. Let me know in the comments if you've seen Venom: The Last Dance. Let me know what you think of that version of Null. Let me know what you think of the King in Black storyline, and let me know what you think Sony's gonna do with Null going forward. But yeah, to wrap things up, let's talk about my cultured picks for this week. So the first one is the All In Special #1. What's really cool about this book is that it's kind of a joint venture by several different creators. Scott Snyder and Joshua Williamson wrote the co-wrote it, and then Wes Craig, Daniel Sampier, and Dan Mora did the art. And it is a flip book, so half the book is one side, and then you have to flip it over to get the other side. But basically this book is in like it's kind of in a way like a new era for DC Comics after the whole absolute power storyline, and that cut off the DC universe from the multiverse. But because of that, Darkseid kind of um, he sensed that since he is like a fixed point in time, he sensed that like all of the other versions of him, he doesn't have to share his power throughout the multiverse, and now it's just him. And it took him a long time to figure this out. He actually had to forcibly become the Spectre's host to figure that out and ask him that question. But he also faces the Justice League during this, and in the end, he figures out that what he wants is, since he's like the only one now, the only Darkseid, he wants his own world. So he goes and he finds this one world that was first introduced in the Dark Knight's Metal storyline, which let me know if you want me to cover that on the channel because that's actually really cool. And I read it a few years ago, but I kind of want to cover it on the channel. But let me know if there's any interest in that. So yeah, so this world is kind of unpopulated. It's new. There's nothing in it. But Darkseid goes to that world and he kind of forms it in his own image and he changes the whole history of everything there. So now everything's and he creates like the absolute universe. So now since the multiverse is cut off, there's just the DC universe, and then there's this absolute universe that is like Darkseid's baby. And that is where all of these new absolute books are going to be taking place. Is basically all the heroes have to become the heroes without their advantages. They have to like fight even harder for everything that they have, for everything they need to accomplish. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting seeing how this absolute universe unfolds. And it's also very clear that going forward, there's going to be a lot of crossover between the two universes, and eventually there is going to be like a head-to-head between Darkseid and the DC universe, and like the Absolute universe is going to be involved. So, and he's like made his own army on the Absolute universe. It's going to be crazy. But I kind of want to talk about that because I thought it was really cool. But it also leads into the Absolute universe, like Absolute Batman, which is very interesting. In a lot of ways, he's like the Batman we know, but in a lot of ways, he isn't. He doesn't have his fortune. He actually grew up with all of like the villains from the comics. Like he's friends with Waylon Jones. He goes to the gym that he owns, but most of those characters haven't become criminals. And there is also a tease at an absolute Joker, but he's kind of the opposite of the Joker we know. He's a billionaire like Bruce Wayne. He's basically like Bruce Wayne, but he doesn't laugh. He doesn't really have a sense of humor, so they call him the Joker as like a snide, like sarcastic nickname. So that's interesting. But yeah, Absolute Batman's very cool. It's only been one issue so far, but the second one's coming out this month. But Very cool. But also, I read Absolute Superman, which is also very cool. They really show a lot of what happened on Krypton in this world. But in this world, Kal-El wasn't sent to Earth as a baby. He actually lived on Krypton for a while as a child, which was very interesting. And the suit he wears, it kind of has like a Kryptonian AI in it, and he's sort of got like a portable Fortress of Solitude with it that helps him absorb solar rays and recharge, which is interesting. But it also seems like his powers are kind of volatile, and he has to recharge from the sun a lot, and he can't really use his X-ray vision without he can't really control it, which is interesting. But he's also it kind of reminds me of the Hulk in some versions where Bruce Banner just kind of going from like place to place as like a nomad, but he's also helping people. This is kind of what he's doing, but he's also following this company called the Lazarus Corporation, and they're like taking advantage of people and just being awful. And he's going around the world like saving people from the Lazarus Corporation, and it seems to have some connection to the Kents. So I'm very curious to see what happens going forward. It's very interesting. Like these books, I think when these books were first announced, there was criticism like, "Oh, they're just like an edgy version," but it's different. These characters are still kind of the same. They still have the same, for the most part, like morals. Not same personality per se, but same characterization for the most part. They just have had different struggles and different ways of going and like different backgrounds. So they're different, but they still feel, adjacent to the characters we know and love. So I do like that they're doing a very good job towing the line between being different and being similar enough to what we know to not like freak people out. And then another aspect that I thought was interesting was on Krypton, there were these like very specific classes of people, like the scientists ruled the whole planet and they were all the elites. And if you challenged the science rule of law at all, you were blacklisted basically. And so it's basically like the scientists. There's like middle management, but then there's the working class, and they're considered the lowest of the low. But they all have this the Superman crest that we've all know and love as the House of El crest. But in this, it's just used to denote all of the working class. But all the working class, they wear the symbol proudly and consider themselves the people of steel. I think that's really interesting. A really interesting take on Superman and on Krypton, and just like how, his symbol, the background of his Superman S shield, all that. I thought that was all really cool. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jason Aaron and Rafa Sandoval do with the series going forward. But that is the end of the episode, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be back next week. Be sure to like and subscribe and share. And if you would prefer to listen to this on Spotify, we're on all major podcast platforms. If you want to check out our social media or check out The Cultured Nerd on social media, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left. And if you'd like to check out Casual Experts, which is my own nerdy brand, I just talk about horror movies, comics, all that kind of stuff. Check out Casual Experts on YouTube, and check out Casual Experts Only, my podcast. And if you'd like to support us, be sure to check us out on Patreon. Look for this show specific tier, patreon.com/theculturednerd, and then the Cultured Pull List tier. I have been your host, Michael Malillo, and you will see me next week where I will be talking about Volume 2 of Jamie Delano's John Constantine Hellblazer series. I covered the first volume last year, and now I'm finally making my way to the second volume. So if you're a fan of Constantine, definitely keep your eyes out next week for that. But until then, I hope you all are well, and I hope you all take care of yourselves.